Welcome to Behind the Transaction from RGCF. In this episode, we'll be discussing significant and complex projects delivered by RGCF in recent months on behalf of EQS, which included a management buyout, a debt raise and an acquisition that all completed at the same time. And joining me in the studio is Carl Swansbury, Partner and Head of Corporate Finance at RGCF, and on the line we have EQS's CEO Andy Goff, and also from RGCF, CF Director Rhiannon Nightingale. Hi everyone. So, firstly, Andy, tell us about EQS, what it is, what it provides, and the sectors in which you operate.
Thanks, Jamie. So Equality Solutions Group is a group of currently 4 legal entities. So just to lead it further into that complex situation you talked about, that first thing, the management buyout, was actually 3 separate legal entities being bought out and brought under an umbrella, with the 4th coming in. So we're passionate about equality, diversity, cognitive disability and mental well-being. And we currently operate in the disabled students allowance sector, which is a big government-funded sector. And we operate with 3 divisions as we were: Innovate, which provides assistive technology equipment; Equality Learning, which does assistive technology face-to-face training in a non-COVID world, and virtual training in the current world. And then Learning Labs, which is a technology provider of e-learning. And the company we bought, Amano, was really the missing piece of the jigsaw within the disabled students allowance sector on what we call non-medical help services.
All right, okay, thank you. So Carl, see, Andy just touched on the acquisition there. So as I said in my intro, this was multifaceted. Can you talk us through the different elements of your work for EQS?
Indeed. So as you mentioned at the beginning, Jamie, there were 3 elements to this very complicated transaction. So the first was to assist Andy and the management team of EQS with the acquisition of the 3 businesses, which was the management buyout element of the transaction. Of course, any management buyout, Jamie, has to be funded, and therefore we also had to run a very complex funding process, which involved us approaching 24 potential funders, including private equity investors and debt providers. And then the third element was the acquisition of Amano, which of course we were running concurrently and completed simultaneously alongside the MBO and what was fundamentally a debt raise, which saw EQS secure £20 million of debt facilities from Shard Credit Partners, which is a London-based debt fund.
Carl, let's focus a little bit on a part of the MBO and particularly managing stakeholders. Tell us a bit about that and the challenges and how you dealt with that in this particular case.
Sure, that's a really great question, Jamie. And there's probably 2 questions, in fact. So I guess the first element is trying to bring together the expectations and aspirations of the selling shareholders with that of the management team, who of course are acquiring the business and arguably want very different things in part to the selling shareholders. So I'm sure Andy will agree, we spent a lot of time understanding what Chris Quickfall, the founder and sole shareholder of EQS, then wanted to achieve from a sale, but also to then try and appreciate what management wanted to be able to achieve as the acquirer of the business. And of course, that is something that not only needs to be managed with kid gloves, but also has to respect, appreciate the perspectives of 2 very separate stakeholder groups, accepting that actually the funding work stream also needs to be considered, because often a seller will want full value on completion, but naturally that might not be something that a funder would support as a consequence of the business not being able to service maybe that level of debt repayment. The second element around stakeholder management, Jamie, is when you're advising on an MBO, not only do you have, of course, the management teams, corporate finance, tax and legal advisors, which is a corporate finance advisor we have to manage the input of, but you also have the sellers, tax advisor, corporate finance advisor and legal advisors. But in this instance, we also had, of course, the advisors of the selling business, which was Amano Technology, which we acquired. And we also had, of course, advisors to the debt fund who fundamentally funded the transaction. So for sure, there were lots of stakeholders that had to be managed very closely to deliver 3 very complex transactions simultaneously.
So Andy, tell us about that process from your perspective. Have you got anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I just think it's a great point that Carl's made, Jamie, that, you know, we had a relationship before the transaction, which was a fantastic relationship, and we just took it for granted that we would need a fantastic relationship post-transaction. So, we never really thought about it because we hadn't been through a transaction like this before. We just expected that would stay. And of course, that was really important in our situation, because not only was Chris the founder of the business, but Chris remains as a minority stakeholder post-business and a really important ambassador and part of the growth of Equality Solutions Group moving forwards. Now, we took it for granted, but actually, without Carl, specifically Carl, who took this mantle on himself to understand all stakeholders, and specifically myself and Chris, where we just both assumed, yeah, we've got a great relationship, so this will be great, but we've never really looked at, well, there's some difficulties here because there are some parts of the transaction that actually there is a conflict of interest. Yeah. And I think, that's really, really difficult for the two stakeholders to manage that themselves. And I think what Carl was able to do was to take that situation and manage it in a very fluid way. And again, I think, we wouldn't have managed to complete the transaction so quickly and so smoothly without that interaction. So I think that's an important part that often would get missed, I think, in a corporate finance advisor's role.
Thanks, Andy. Join us for part 2 of this video, where we'll be talking to Rhiannon about the funding options that are available to EQS and also what's next for the business and its M&A strategy.